Our prayers this morning as we look into the Word of God. The Lord has given unto us a message. I desire to relay it to you, and that you might receive a blessing from the scriptures and thoughts that He has given. The title of this message is Hide Me. And I would like to turn to Psalms, the 27th chapter and the 5th verse. Psalms 27, verse 5.
For in the time of trouble,
For in the time of trouble,
he shall hide me.
He shall hide me in his pavilion.
In the secret of his
In
tabernacle.
the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me.
He shall set me up upon a
He
rock.
shall set me up upon a rock. There are three components to this verse. And this verse, first of all, the three components, he said he shall hide me in his pavilion.
Mhm.
And the writers say that is the tabernacle. When we think about the way the tabernacle was designed and built, when the children of Israel was living on the earth, there was a tent that was constructed for worship, and there was an area, general area where people could congregate. And then he said, in the secret of his tabernacle, which is the holy place, shall he hide me. And that was the place in which only the priest could go and administer the offerings to God. Then it says, he shall set me up upon a rock. And when we think about a rock, how many of us has ever run into a rock? I'm sure all of us have had the occasion to bump into a rock or two in our life. And what happened? The rock didn't move, did it? The rock wasn't broken. So that rock represents the strength and the establishment of us in God. So David was in a place where he needed some help from the Lord. He needed some encouragement. He needed the Lord to help him to know what he could do for him. And this also was a foreshadowing of the blessings of salvation, where God is able to place us both physically and spiritually under his protection. He can cover us in the midst of a wicked and perverse generation. So as I thought about this particular scripture, there's a lot of thoughts that came to my mind. And there were some other scriptures that were given that pertain to where we live in this day and time. But before we get to those, I would like to give us a definition of what it means to hide. The first definition that I found was to prevent from being seen or discovered. And many of us growing up, we had the occasion to play hide and seek with our siblings. And some of us usually found some really good hiding places. Some of us could hide in places that were so concealed that the person that had to be searching would eventually give up. They say, I can't find you. Where are you? And then you come out of your little secret hiding place. It was a lot easier when you were smaller to hide as opposed to when you were bigger and you were playing with your younger siblings. There were places they could hide that you couldn't hide. There were secret places, like, for example, under the bed. They could get under the bed, put stuff in the way, and you'd never find it. But you imagine a big person trying to get under the bed. You'd hear them bumping around. It wouldn't quite fit. There's only certain places a big person can hide. So that speaks to us a little bit of how we need to be in the sight of God. If we are small in the sight of God, it's a whole lot easier for him to hide us than if we are big in our own eyes. The second definition is to keep out of sight. I'm sure all of us have personal belongings that we don't just leave sitting out on the table. We have a particular place that we put things where it's out of sight, and the only person that knows it's there is us. The third definition is to cover. If I'm going to hide something, I can cover it up, can't I? You buy somebody a particular present, what do? You cover it, don't you? You wrap it up in paper. That's a cover. They can't look at that and say, oh, I know exactly what that is. Now, granted, there are some presents, it's hard to cover them. but most of them you can cover. And then the last definition is to make undecipherable or imperceivable by obscuring or concealing. And this is something that God specializes with his people. He is able to hide them in a way, even though they are in plain sight. People don't set their eye on them and can understand and comprehend what God is done in that person's life or is doing in that person's life. So he is able to conceal and obscure us from the world around us in which we live, which leads us to our next couple of scriptures. He is able to hide us from man. Psalms 31 and 20. And someone else gets Psalms 64 and 2. Pay attention closely to what these scriptures say.
31 and 20.
Psalms 31 and 20 says,
hide them in the secret of thy presence.
Thou shalt hide them in the secret of thy presence
From the pride of man.
From the pride of man.
Thou shalt keep
Thou
them
shalt
secretly
keep
in a pavilion.
Secretly in a
from the strife
pavilion
of tongues.
from the strife of tongues. Now read Psalms 64 and 2. Psalms 64 and 2.
Says, hide me from the secret,
Hide me
from the secret plots
from
of
the
wicked,
secret counsel of the wicked,
from the rebellion of the workers of iniquity.
from the insurrection of the workers of iniquity. These two go together. They relate to the way the world is now. If we look at what's going on in the world, there's a whole lot of strife of tongues, isn't it?
There is.
There's a whole lot of plots and things going on that could really draw us in, could get our attention, could cause us to get caught up in what's going on. But there's something that God does for us, that in the strife of this world, when it tries to draw us in, God has a way of hiding us from it. And many people get caught up in what's going on in the world. And they sit there and they argue about it. And in reality, there is not much they can do, can they?
That's very true.
They have taken all their time, their energy and attention, have gotten caught up in the cares and the troubles of this world, which boil down to the pride of man, because that is why there's trouble, is because man has decided I can do this myself without God. And so we see the strife and the trouble and all the cares that go on. God has a way of hiding us from these things. One of the benefits we have of this salvation is we can live for God. We can enjoy his divine protection. We can enjoy his comfort. He can get us into the secret place, into the pavilion. He can bless us and keep our minds at peace and at rest. While the rest of the world is like that foaming sea you see. You ever been by a body of water, that maybe a river that was moving, and it comes over a little waterfall, and just at the bottom, as that water dumps into that spot, that water is churning in all kinds of directions. There is so much commotion going on. But you know, down in the lower part of that area, there are channels that form from the turmoil of the water, and there is calm spots that the fish use to travel back and forth in those spots. You and I can be like the fish. We can find that secret place in God where we can be at rest, where we can move about, we can live our lives. Let's look at an example. I'd like to turn to 1 Samuel, the 24th chapter. Some of us are familiar with this particular situation that occurred. This is David and Saul. And something happened through the course of Saul's life where he left God. He turned his back on God, decided he wanted to go his own way. Well, David was a man who was following God, and God had told Saul, I'm going to replace you as king. Well, we knew that man would be David. there was some turmoil there that Saul had it out for David. I'm going to get this guy before he ever becomes king. Well, you know what? It caused David some stress and some trouble, some strife, and I can't help but wonder that some of the songs that he wrote was in response to what he remembered then as he dealt with Saul. Here is the king. That is equivalent of the president coming after you. Who can stop the president from coming after you if he wants to get you? There are many rulers that we see in the world today that are going after people, and there's no one to stop them. Those people are at the mercy of that person's decision. So David was in that place. I'm at the mercy of this man Saul who's trying to come kill me. I want to start reading at the first verse of the 24th chapter of Psalm of 1 Samuel.
And it came to
Came
pass,
Saul
when
was returned from following the Philistines,
and it was
told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of Engedi.
Then Saul took 3,000
chosen men out of Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of wild goats. Now, why do you need 3,000 men to go chase down one man and his few men? He had ill intent for David. He was going to make sure that when I get out there in the wilderness, I'm going to find this guy and I'm going to get him. All right, read on.
And he came to the
sheep coast by the way. There was a cave.
And Saul went in
to cover his feet.
And David and his men remained
And
in the sides of the
and
cave.
his men remained in the sides of the cave.
And the men of David said
unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord is unto thee. Behold, I deliver thine enemy into thy hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee.
Then
David arose, cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. Now let me pause right there for a minute. Have you ever been in a cave? It is super quiet. It's dark and sound travels really well. You can bump a little pebble in a cave and that sound will echo off all the walls. Now here Saul is in this cave, and it said David and his men was in the sides of the cave. You mean to tell me Saul was deaf? He couldn't hear, and none of his other men could hear? And David could come all the way over from where he was, go stand over him, cut off a piece of his coat, and Saul still didn't wake up. That's hiding. That is God hiding David.
Yes.
Saul's hands were tied when it came to David. That even though Saul was God's anointed at that particular time, David was God's future anointed. Yes. And so as you think about that here, I remember going to the lake fishing, and it's dark outside. It's flat calm. The water's like glass. And I could hear the conversation of the people on the other side of the lake, and they were a mile away. Let me tell you something. There's no way that Saul didn't hear David. God hid.
Yes.
Read on.
And it came to pass
afterwards,
David's
heart slowed him because he had cut off Saul's skirt.
And he said unto his men, The Lord
forbid I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed. So stretch forth my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord.
So David
stayed his servants with these words, suffered them not to rise against Saul.
But Saul rose up out of the cave.
And went his way. Now, not only did he tiptoe up to him, cut off a piece of his skirt, he carried on a conversation with his men in the cave. And Saul never heard a word. That's hid. That's the way God can hide us. In these situations that are going on, these places of strife and turmoil, God can hide us. We could be sitting in the midst of it and be at peace while everybody else is getting their feathers all ruffled. This is a hiding place that God has for us. Read on.
David also arose after.
David also rose after, went out of the cave, cried after Saul, saying, "My Lord the king."
And when Saul
looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself.
David said
to Saul, "Where hearest thou? Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold,
David seeketh
thy hurt.
Behold this day.
Behold this day. Thine eyes shall have seen how that the Lord
had
delivered thee today into my hand in the cave.
Some
bade me kill thee,
but mine
but mine eyes spared
And
thee. And I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord,
for he is the
for
Lord's
he
anointed.
is the Lord's anointed.
Moreover,
my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand,
for in that
I cut off the skirt of thy robe and kill thee not.
Know thou
and see there is neither evil nor transgression in my hand.
and
I have not sinned against thee,
yet thou
yet thou huntest
to take it.
my soul to take it. When a man goes to hunt something, he puts forth a lot of effort. He not only goes out to check out the terrain, he learns about his prey. He studies it. He knows when it's most active, when it's not active. And he is going to come in at the most opportune time. This is what Saul's mindset was. But you see how God hid David?
Yes.
That David could do all this in the cave and Saul never heard a word. But when he went out of the cave and David went out of the cave and David called his name, it said he looked back. He heard him quite well, didn't he? That tells us what God did in that situation. God is able to hide us in some of the situations we deal with in this world. You ever been on a job where God had to hide you? Because there is trouble and turmoil going on between individuals in the workplace where you are. And God had the ability to hide you in those situations. How can you just sit there and not say nothing? Don't you know what's been going on here? I'm in the heat. I'm in the hiding place. I'm in the secret pavilion. And that's what God has for us. This world in which we live, there is continually strife on every hand. You get up in the morning, if you look at the news, you can see all of the trouble and the strife that is occurring. Issues cropping up here and there, just all random places. You know, it's not like you can see the only pattern that you can see is that there's evil going on. That's the only pattern you see. But it's all random and it's all over the place. You see how the enemy takes people who don't have God in their life and they get so caught up in strife and turmoil. But we as a people of God have a hiding place where we can get away from it, even though we live in this world. I'd like to now consider the trouble that we have in life. Psalms 17:18. The Lord is able to hide us in the times of our trouble.
Keep me as the apple of the eye.
As the apple of the eye.
Hide me under the shadow.
Hide me under the shadow of thy wings. That's one of those definitions to cover. God's got a wing, if you will, that in the time of trouble, when it's most difficult, when it's most pressing, when maybe we don't see a way out, maybe we look at the situation and say, you know what, there's nothing I can do about this. And God puts that wing over us, covers us in those times. You know, I don't believe there's anyone in this entire world that had experienced trouble like Job. I don't think anyone can say I've experienced more trouble than Job experienced. Job had experienced so much trouble. He experienced trouble temporally. He experienced trouble in his family. He experienced trouble in his body. He experienced trouble with his friends rejecting him. He experienced trouble with the turmoil that was going on in his mind. And he reached a place where he said, I think I want to die because the trouble's too great. I want to turn to Job, the 14th chapter and the 13th verse. Let's see what he said.
Oh, that thou wouldest hide me
Oh, that thou wouldest hide
in the
me
grave,
in the grave,
that thou wouldest keep me secret
that thou dost keep me
until
secret
thy wrath be
until thy
past,
wrath be
that
past,
thou wouldest
that thou wouldest appoint me a
time
set time
and remember me.
and remember me. Now look at this. Job thought that maybe God had just turned his wrath on him. And he asked God to hide him in the grave. In other words, I've had it with all the trouble that I've had in my life, and it's better if I be dead. That's the place that he had reached. None of us has experienced this kind of trouble, but I'm sure we may have thought about, man, I might just gone to leave this world. So many things going on. But I want us to consider this. Even though sometimes trouble can cause us a little despair or we want to give up in our mind. I'm through with it. I'm going to turn it loose. I'm through with it. You could be in the mindset of Job. Hide me in the grave. There's no trouble in the grave if you're righteous. If you're not, that's the beginning of trouble.
Yes.
But Job was in a good place. He knew he was righteous before God. So where I'm going to hide? I can't get away from all this stuff that was going on. His body's covered in boils, even to the soles of his feet. He couldn't even walk around without feeling the pain. He couldn't sit without feeling the pain. He couldn't lean on anything. And he was beyond what he could take. And he said, hide me in the grave. But consider this. Job, at that particular point in time, thought death would be easier than dealing with the troubles he was experiencing. But he would have missed the blessings that followed.
True.
Not only the blessings that followed, he would have missed out on the understanding and the experience that he received with God. When you look at the book of Job, there are a few chapters that God specifically spent time with Job and spoke to him and revealed all kinds of mysteries to him. Job would have missed out on that experience if God would have honored his request and hide him in the grave. He got to understand God's ability to create and how he orchestrates everything in this world. That experience of him going through the troubles, I believe there's no one in this world that can give better advice on dealing with troubles than Job. Not only that, when you look at the end, when it was all said and done, all the boils gone, he's healthy. It said God restored him double. He would have missed all those blessings. That's why God looked at his request and considered where he was. You know what? He doesn't really understand. I know he's suffering. I know the troubles are great, but I can hide him better than in the grave. I can give him what he needs to be able to deal with these troubles. And when he comes out of it, he's going to have some understanding, some experience, and some blessing that no one can take away from him.
Yeah.
And then when someone else goes through troubles, Job can empathize. Job can speak that kind word that will lift up that one that's in trouble. And that's because of the hiding place that God creates. I want to consider also this particular passage, Isaiah, the 49th chapter. This is God hiding those that he wants to use. Isaiah, the 49th chapter. This particular passage or this particular chapter is passages from Isaiah that talk about Christ
Yeah.
and what he would do. And it also talks about how Israel will be glorified. I want to read verse 2.
And he has made my mouth.
He has made
like a
my mouth
sword.
sharp like a sharp
In
sword.
the shadow of his hand.
In the shadow of his hand hath he hid
And
me.
made me a polished
Made me a polished
In his
shaft.
quiver hath he
In
hid
his
me.
quiver hath he hid me. Now, as I considered this particular passage, God has chosen ones that he has called. Each and every person that he calls to this salvation, he has a purpose.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's not revealed to us right away. Sometimes there's some qualifying, some growing that we have to do. So the Lord has a hiding place to put us in while he develops us.
Mhm.
And the prophet likened it unto a quiver.
Yes.
What is a quiver for?
Hold arrows.
A quiver is to hold a group of arrows to keep them from being damaged or bent, keeping the tips from being dulled. It said his tongue was like a sharp sword. You know, when Christ walked around in the earth in his time, what was he carrying? He was carrying the eternal word of God in his lips. He was the eternal word of God. And he was right there in front of people. And what did he give them? He gave them instruction for living, how to get through life, how to treat one another. All these things he provided. He was a sharp sword in the midst of people. And there were people that didn't like what he had to say. And what did they do? They said, we're going to get him. We're going to find a way to take him. You know, in one place, it said they sought him, but they couldn't find him. In another place, it said they sought to lay hands on him, and he slipped through. Another man, Apostle Paul, was out giving the sharp word to individuals, and they sought to kill him. What did they do? They lowered him over the city walls in a basket. God has a way of hiding those that he wants to use.
Yes.
You and I, we are instruments in the hands of God. We have his word within us. And there's going to be times when that light is going to shine, but there is a appointed time for that light to shine. In the meantime, we are in that quiver. We're an arrow in God's quiver. And he has the ability to hide us, even in this day and time. There are places where Christians are suffering, they're being persecuted, but that is their time. That's not the case everywhere. There are many places that Christians live comfortable and peaceable lives. That may not always be the case. But God can hide us in any of those situations. You know, them Hebrew boys, when they was in that fire, they got hid. How do you explain a human body being in a furnace, in the flames, and not being burnt up? There is a hiding or that wing that covered them where they were not consumed. It said after he heated it 7 times hotter, the men that threw them in, they perished. That's that wing we talking about. You're the apple of my eye, I'm going to cover you with my wing. That was a barrier between that human body and the fire. God is able to do that with us in this day and time, both physically and spiritually. We may be in places where it may not be the best environment. And right now, our world is not the best environment to live in. And it's not like you can hide from everything. There's groups of people that they cut off the world completely. But that's not always possible.
Yeah.
It's you got a phone, it's on your phone. All the trouble that's going on. You go somewhere, it's on the news. It's on the radio. Sometimes you're out in the mall and you observe it. You hear the sirens every day. You know, some people, the Christians in Russia, in Ukraine, you know what they're hearing? They're hearing the bombs every day. God is hiding them. He's protecting them. He's keeping them from the evil that's going on. I don't believe any of them want to give up and say, well, it ain't worth it to live for God. I don't believe that's the case. I believe they understand that God is our protection. And whatever happens is by his hand. So as we consider each one of us, God wants to use. And many occasions he's going to hide us. Like the description here in this definition, undecipherable or imperceptible. You know what a decipher is? They use a decipher to find hidden code in a picture or a series of words. You and I are like that hidden code in the world today that is hid. And there's only one person that God's going to allow to see that. And that's the one that he intends for us to affect and to influence. He'll open up their eyes. They'll see the depth of our life. They look at us. Initially, people look at people and, oh yeah, that's just another person. Well, that person's this color. That person's an old person. That person's a young person. But it is decipher the hidden depth. What's behind the person? It's what God has put in us.
Yes.
The value that God has put in us, that we can be a blessing to someone else. We are like those deciphers or those ciphers. I want to get Jeremiah the 36th chapter. We have an example of this particular situation in the 36th chapter of Jeremiah. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but on your own, take time to read this particular situation that went on. But I'm just going to highlight a few scriptures to point out some things. Before we begin reading, I want us to understand what this was, a message that was coming from God, and he intended it to be read from the least to the greatest. That means the ordinary man on the street all the way up to the king. So let's begin reading. I want us to get verses 1 through 3 initially.
And it came to pass,
the fourth year, Jehoiakim,
son of
Josiah, king of Judah,
this
this word came out of Jeremiah from the Lord, saying,
Take thee
a roll of a book, and write therein all the words that I have spoken unto thee against Israel and against Judah, against all the nations, from the day I spake unto thee, from the days of Josiah, even unto this day.
It may be that
the house of Judah will hear all the evil which I purpose to do unto them. They may return every man from his evil way, that I may forgive the iniquity of their sin. So this is the message that had come. The Lord had spoken to Jeremiah and said, I want you to write down everything that I purpose to do to these particular kingdoms. Why? Because you have strayed from me. Now drop down and read verse 6.
Therefore go thou,
read on the roll which thou hast written from my mouth, the words of the Lord in the ears of the people in the Lord's house upon the fasting day. Also thou shalt read them in the ears of all Judah that come out of their cities. So here, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have you read it to the ones that are going to be in church. Then I want you to read it to everybody that comes out the city. Every ordinary person. Now let's go to the 14th verse.
Therefore
all the princes sent Jehudi, the son of Nethaniah, son of Shelemiah, son of Cushai, and Baruch, saying, Take thine hand the roll therein that thou hast read the ears of the people, and come. So Baruch, the son of Neriah, took the roll in his hand, came unto them. You notice it's not Jeremiah that's carrying the roll now. It's Baruch. It's somebody else. God said, all right, I want Baruch to go. Why did he send Baruch instead of Jeremiah? We don't know. But it was a purpose that God had for Baruch.
Yes.
So where is he going? Read on.
And he said unto
him, sit down now and read it in our ears.
So
Baruch read it in their ears.
Now it came to
Now it
pass,
came to
when they had
pass,
heard all the words,
When they had heard all the words, they were afraid both one and another, said unto Baruch, we will surely tell the king of these words.
And they asked
They asked Baruch,
tell us now,
tell us now, how dost thou write all these words at his mouth?
Then Baruch answered him,
Pronounce all these words unto me with his mouth, and I wrote them with ink in the book.
Then said the
princes unto Baruch, go, hide thee,
thou and
Jeremiah,
and
let no man know where ye be. So here he's gone now. He's gone from the people. Now they're reading to the princes. This is a hierarchy of the kingdom in that day. So the princes have now heard what God's intentions were.
Yes.
Now let's go on and read from verse 20 to 31.
And they went into
the king's court,
but they laid
on the roll of the chamber
of Elishama,
Elishama the scribe
and
told all the words in the ear of the king.
So the king
So the
sent
king sent
Jehudi
Jehudi
to fetch the roll.
to fetch the
And he
roll,
took it
took it
out of
Elishama's
Elishama, the
scribe's
chamber.
chamber.
And Jehudi
Jehudi read it in the ears of the king,
and in the ears of all
ears of the
princes
princes,
which
which
stood
stood beside the king.
Now the king
Now the
sat
king
in the
sat in the winter house
in
the
the
ninth
And
month.
there was a fire
There was
on
a
the
fire on the hearth
before him.
burning before him.
And it came to pass,
Came
that
to
when
pass,
Jehudi had read
When
3 or 4
Jehudi had
leaves,
read it 3 or 4 leaves, he cut it with the penknife,
cast it into
cast it
the
in the
fire
fire that was
until
on the hearth.
all the roll was
So all
consumed in
the
the fire
roll
that
was
on the hearth.
consumed in the fire that was on the hearth.
Yet they were not afraid.
Yet they were not
nor rent
afraid,
their garments.
nor rent
Neither
their
the
garments.
king,
Neither the
nor
king
any
nor
of
any
his
of his servants heard all these words.
Nevertheless,
Nevertheless,
Elnathan
and Delilah
Jemira
and Jemira
had made
had made intercession to the king that he would not burn the
but
roll,
he would not hear them.
but he would not hear them.
But the king commanded,
that Jeremiah,
the son of
The son of
Hamlet,
Hamlet,
and Sariah,
Sariah the son of Azrael,
and Shelemiah,
Shelemiah the son of
to
Abiel,
take Baruch the
to
scribe,
take Baruch the scribe and Jeremiah the
But
prophet.
the Lord hid them.
See this? The Lord hid him. God is the one that said he was going to do these things. So the people heard and they paid attention to it. The princes heard and they paid attention to it. But now we got over here to where the king is, and the king, the pride of man, he's not having it. And so he takes the scroll and he throws it in the fire. Well, what is that supposed to do? Does that cancel what God said he's going to do?
No.
No, it doesn't. It just showed where he was with respect to regarding God.
Yes.
And not only that, I want you to go get Baruch and Jeremiah. But it said, couldn't find them because the Lord hid them. Sometimes there are people that we encounter or have interaction with that have purpose to get us. And they made purpose in their mind. Well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'll just put it like this. You may have a boss and say, you know what? I'm going to fire you.
Yes.
But if it ain't God's will, God hides you. And they can't do a thing. This king could not touch Jeremiah or Baruch. Read on.
Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah.
Then the word of the Lord
after that
came
the
to
king had
Jeremiah
burned the
after the
roll,
king had
and
burned the
words
roll,
which Baruch wrote at
and
the
the
mouth
words
of
which
Jeremiah,
Baruch
saying,
wrote at the mouth of Jeremiah, saying,
take thee again another
take
roll,
thee again another
and
roll,
write in it
and write in it all the former words that were in the first roll, which Jehoiakim the king of Judah had burned.
And thou shalt say
And thou shalt say to Jehoiakim king of Judah, thus saith the Lord, thou hast burned this roll, saying, why hast thou written therein, saying, King of Babylon shall certainly come and destroy this land, and shall cause to cease from thence man and beast.
Therefore,
Thus saith the Lord of Jehoiakim, king of Judah.
He shall have none to
He shall
sit
have
upon
none
the
to
throne
sit
of
upon the
David,
throne of
and
David,
his dead
and
body
his dead body shall
in
be
the
cast
day
out
to the
into
heat,
the day,
and
in the
night
day
to
to the heat,
frost.
and in the night to the frost. Now, see, God added to it. Didn't he? All right, you want to go get my chosen ones that I gave my word to? This is what's going to happen to you. And it came to pass.
Yes.
He died, his body was thrown out into the heat, and it sat out there in the frost. That means nobody came and buried him. Just like, remember Jezebel? I'm going to get you, Elijah, before the day is over. 7 years later, Elijah's still going around doing what he's supposed to be doing. And you know where Jezebel was? She was lying in the street being eaten by dogs. God has the ability to hide his people. And even though there are people that think they have authority or power in this world, they have none over God. And whatever they say they're going to do, it can only happen if God lets them. You have these people that I want to shoot nukes over there. If God don't let you shoot nukes, you're not shooting no nukes. He's going to protect his people. And it seems like there's a lot of people in this world that think that they have that kind of power, that they have forgotten that there is a God in heaven that rules and reigns everywhere. And even though you burn the roll so nobody can read it, the word still stands. And it is God who is going to be the one that's going to hide us. Colossians 3. Verses 1 through 3.
If ye be then risen with
If
Christ,
ye then be risen with Christ,
seek those things which are
seek
above,
those things which are above,
where Christ sitteth on
where
the right
Christ
hand of God.
sitteth on the right hand of God.
Set your affections,
Set your
on things
affections
above,
on things above, not on
earth,
things on the earth.
for ye are dead.
For ye are
And
dead.
Your
Your life is hid
in God.
with Christ in God. If you and I are spiritually minded, no matter what's going on in this world, we know that God can hide us.
Yes.
And whatever law changes they make that affect our life, God still can hide us. And he'll help us to work around them things. Whatever decrees are made by presidents and senators and House representatives, dictators, whatever the ruler is that affects the lives of Christians, God's got to work around.
Yes.
And if we keep this perspective that we're Christ, we belong to Christ, and we are in his kingdom.
Yeah.
And when his kingdom comes back, guess what? None of these other kingdoms going to be around.
True.
All their empty words will be as dung. We have a future. And if we allow God to hide us in the tough times, in the times when men are fussing and fighting everywhere around us, that covers the home all the way up to the highest ranks of government. God will hide us.
Yes.
If we are in the trouble, not as though we can be as much trouble as Job was in, but sometimes the trouble gets pretty hard, doesn't it? He can hide us. There's a blessing at the end of that. And we belong to God. We are chosen. He has a purpose for each one of us and a timing in which he uses us to illuminate light in the earth. He can hide us in those times too. when those ones that want to have it out for us, I mean to get that person. I want to bring them to ruin. God can hide us from that person
Yes.
also.
True.
And when it's all said and done, that kingdom that was established is here too.
Mhm.
We're a part of it. Man can't touch it. They can't change it. They can't do nothing with it. We are a part of that kingdom. And when that kingdom comes back, there will nothing be standing. Nothing will be left standing. That will be the only kingdom that will remain. And we won't have to be hid anymore.
True.
For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock.
Amen. We have a phone call. Yeah.